But we live in a really interesting time. We've spent the last 50, 60 years going through this phase of modern art. Modern art.
Yeah.
In fact, when I was going to college, abstract art was all that you could learn. And I would go into these classes and I would go, I want to paint like David. I want to paint, skin like Rembrandt. How do you paint like that? How do you paint like, Bouguereau and some of these? How do you paint like that? And I would sit in my art classes and we'd have this beautiful porcelain-like models sitting there, with draped in a classical pose. And I would go to the teacher and go, come on, how do you get that porcelain effect? And most of his teachers would say, I don't know. I went to school in the 60s and we were just throwing paint on the canvas. I mean, this was 1980. And all of the teachers at the time were products of abstract art, modern art. And we live in a really great period of time right now because that's all fading away. Mm-hmm. And what's coming into play is realism and quality of art. Yeah, it's really, really cool. And, now you see people painting in that manner. These wonderful traditional styles. In fact, more it's about now how well you can do it as opposed to how original you could get. I mean, before it was like, abstract art. It's self-expression. But the problems with self-expression is that it's boring. Self-expression is like cooking dinner for yourself. That's wonderful. But it's a lot more fun when there's people over.
That's for sure.
Right?
They help to eat.
You can make love by yourself. But it's always better to have somebody else in the room. So self-expression is very limiting. Especially when you're so indulgent in self-expression that people don't get it anymore. And the problem with art is that it's become totally alienated from society. So now you get people walking around in cities, they don't even want to step into the gallery because they're intimidating. They're intimidated about what they don't know about painting. And that's sad. People don't feel intimidated about going to see a play. People don't feel intimidated about going and listening to a piece of music or buying a record, but they feel intimidated about going into the gallery. And what happened? Why had art gotten to the point where people felt like they didn't understand it? It has been a product of what artists have done over the past 50 years. And the attitude was, well, if you don't get it, you shouldn't look at it.
That's true.
What I do is far more important than what you think of my work. It's my self-expression. It's like, good, then keep it at home. Art, what is art? What is art?
It's your expression of yourself.
It's the expression of you. What is art?
Communication.
It's communication. It's about being human, experiencing human activities, human life, and sharing that with others. Now, photography isn't art. It's a recreation of something. It's a mechanical device. It doesn't have a brain. It doesn't think. You could push buttons and make things, try to make it look like the way you think it feels. But art is definitely in the moment. It's created right now by your soul.
It's between copying and creating.
It's the difference between copying and creating. But the thing is, creating life experience as opposed to being self-expression. You could be self-expressive and people just don't get you. Okay? But there's a certain thing about being human, and we call it communication. I could stand up here and go blah, 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 and you wouldn't understand a word. And I could totally make sense in my head because all my blahs are like, self-expressions. But it doesn't make sense to you because we are human beings communicating. In fact, it's us communicating that makes us human, that makes us survive. I mean, originally cavemen came and they left until one caveman all of a sudden realized that you can make fire. And he told somebody else how to make fire. And when you have that communication, people survive. Somebody says, no, make a coat out of that fur. All of a sudden, now everybody's making coats and they survive. Us being human and creating great art comes out of our ability of being alive, by being a human being experiencing human ideas, human thoughts. It's that moment, a lot of people will go, I don't know what I'm going to paint. If I'm going to paint original, what is it that I'm going to paint? They're totally stuck. You don't have to come up with something clever. Yeah, you could paint cans of soup, Campbell's soup, or pictures of blue dogs and be very clever. But that's not being human. If you want to know what to paint, think about the last time you nudged one of your spouses or your husband and said, look at that sunset. Look at that light on the water. That thing that they turn around and they look at and they go, God, I didn't even notice that. All of you have experienced that. That nudge that you say, hey, look at that light on that building. Isn't that gorgeous? And they look up and they go, wow. I mean, I'm amazed sometimes when I'm driving down on the highway and there's this beautiful moment when the clouds open up and the light's shining up on the meadows and I go, oh, and I'm all by myself. And I'm looking at all the other cars on the highway and not one person is seeing what I'm seeing. And I just want to sit there and honk and go, look. That's being human. That's what's wonderful about being alive.
That's true.
That's the thing. And as artists, it's our job to recreate that for other people to see. Once they see it, they'll look for it. Van Gogh's paintings of sunflowers may or may not be great, but he has taught us what to look for. You cannot look at a sunflower without seeing Van Gogh's painting. He showed us how to look at sunflowers. Artists are here to show the world how beautiful it is. It's blasphemous to think that we are going to get something better later. To think that after we die, we're going to go to this beautiful place like heaven and forget about our life here today. Our heaven is right now. And us as artists, our job is to express that in whatever way we can. And we live in such a wonderful period of time right now that there isn't a style. There isn't a one way of painting. So some of my artists in the classroom here are very, very what we'd call tight painters. And we were talking about this last night in class. And Nicole, okay? She's a very tight painter. And we've had some conversations about that. And she goes around and she's looking at, this plein air movement. And she's like going, I need to loosen up my work. And I go, why? And she says, because everybody out there is painting these really loose paintings. And I go, but that's not you. When you go outdoors and you look at nature, you look at all of the details, all of the stuff that we pass up. You show us how beautiful a mushroom looks. You show us how beautiful light is on the surface of an object. And you do it very realistically. And we live in a period of time where you're accepted by that. You don't have to go and be a plein air painter to be a painter. You don't have to goop paint on the canvas and paint very thickly to justify you being an artist. If you are a tight painter, that's okay. Because we have this wonderful thing called the internet. And for every tight painter there is out there, there's hundreds of people who see the world just like you. Thousands of people. And you know what? They're going to love your work. And for some of you, you like lots of color. You paint with lots of color. In fact, some of you, I would say your paintings only are good because of the amount of color that's in them. And you know what? There are thousands of people out there that can't wait for your next painting of color. There's a lot of you who are fearful of going into plein air painting. Okay, don't be. But you don't have to be a plein air painter to become a great painter. There's plenty of people out there that will love your work. And this great thing with the internet is that it gives us an opportunity to come together and to take a look at all of it. And I love going through Facebook and seeing all of the different wonderful styles that are out there. You know, when the salons in France were popular, we had old school representational paintings in those salons. You had coronations of kings and battles and victories and Christ on a cross. And then the Impressionists came. And they had a new way of looking at things. And they couldn't get their paintings into the salons. For years they were shunned. The market was closed to them. And lots of them starved because there was no way to reach the market. We don't live that way anymore. There are as many people that want your paintings as people want to do plein air paintings. You don't have to be a plein air painter. And so when I pull out plein air painting things, don't feel like you're behind the 8 ball and that you have to get out there and paint. No, it's perfectly fine. It's good. I'd like to share my experiences with you. It is wonderful to go out and experience nature. The problem is with a lot of plein air painters is that they don't get it either. Because they're so busy trying to render what's in front of them like a photograph that they forget what inspires them to get out there to paint in the first place. You know, when you're painting outdoors, there's a moment when you step out on the edge and you're inspired and you go, that's it, I gotta go paint. And you go running back into the car, you pull out all of your paint stuff, turpentine falls over, the cop comes over and says you got to move your car. You know, you come back again and all of a sudden the sun came up and it was like, you know, and so, but you figure, well, I'm here, I got a ticket, I got a, you know, no turpentine, I might as well make it, you know, God forbid you come home and your wife says, where were you? And you're like, well, I was painting, but I didn't get anything done. So you feel like you've got to at least show something for you. So you stand out there and you just try to repaint what you're seeing. And every time you look up, the sun's changing. You know, that's the biggest mistake you can do with plein air painting. A plein air painter goes out and they're inspired. And they have to remember that moment of inspiration. When we're talking about my CDs, when we filmed this show, and the reason why my show works better than a lot of people who do plein air painting is because we would go out at 5 or 6 in the morning and wait for the sunrise. And while the sun was rising, the cameraman would sit there and go, so what are you going to paint? And I go, okay, I want the light on that flower. I want the light on that tree. I want the light on that river. I like the light on that mountain. And he would go film all these things. And then I would go out there, it'd be now 9 o'clock, the light's already up, the day's shot, and I would have to recreate all of those things that I know he took pictures of. And he spliced them in to my timeline. So that if I'm out there painting, it's 10 o'clock in the morning, and I go down and notice, and particularly like even with this one, we have these beautiful little bachelor button flowers that are in the front. And so I'd go, you know, I remembered when we shot the beautiful lighting effect on the flowers and how they you know, light. And so, you know, it's now 9, 10, 11 o'clock. They're just in full light. So I had to recreate that moment of what it would look like, because I know we had a really awesome photograph at 6 in the morning. And I'd say, notice how the wonderful shadows and highlights are on these little flowers. And notice how the light streams across. And he would splice in these images from 2 hours prior to that. So when you splice back in, you're seeing my image before I was even painting. So the key to plein air painting is remembering the moment you were inspired, not chasing the light. Most plein air painters fail because they stand out there and they're painting right now, right now, right now. And as the light changes in their painting, and the painting gets flatter and flatter. And at 12 o'clock, when the day is absolutely the ugliest, that's what you're painting on your painting. Those final details are 12 o'clock in the afternoon, no shadows, no highlights. And so consequently, a lot of the paintings are flat. A plein air painter, best thing to do is to go out on location with your stuff, set your stuff down, look at it, be inspired. Pull up your canvas, sketch it out, keep that moment in your mind, and then take your paint stuff and turn your back and start painting. And only look back if you need a reference. If you go, what did that rock look like? Was there a rock? Oh yeah, there was a rock. But you have to keep in mind that first moment that you were out there. That is the key. That is the reason why most people fail at plein air painting. It is a painting, a skill of remembering what you saw when you were first inspired. Not just sitting there blindly painting the whole afternoon along. Okay? Any questions? That's enough.
Did you think it's better to paint in acrylic first?
No.
No? So it
No.
doesn't get so
Don't.
soupy and everything?
No, you have to learn the progression of painting. Don't paint it in acrylic first. No.
I was going to do that.
That's a shtick. No. I don't like acrylic anyway.
I know, but it's dry.
It smells funny, it dries too fast, it's not effective. But painting, an oil painting, and learning how to put paint on the canvas in the proper, gradually, that's the best way to get a painting down. Okay? So, any questions? Yeah.
Do you ever prep the canvas first?
Sometimes I'll stain it first, just to get kind of the white. That white can be really brilliant. And when we did the television show, we always had to stain because we shot in digital. And so the camera didn't like the white surface. It couldn't adjust on the white. So we had to stain the surface that way. But there's a lot of glare when you're looking at a white canvas. And a lot of times when you stain the canvas, as you're painting, you don't have to cover the canvas. You know, it's like if there's brown on the canvas, you don't have to cover it. If it were just white, sometimes that white bleeds through. So you don't have to do that. Okay?
What color would you stain it beforehand, depending on what you're doing? Or
It depends. If it's like an early morning scene, you could glaze the whole scene with ultramarine blue or cobalt blue. Oftentimes, I just stain my canvases with a nice warm color like asphaltum or burnt sienna, burnt umber. So any color will do. Sometimes some artists love putting purple in because they think, you know, that part of the impressionist thing was to put purple in everybody's shadow. You know, so neutral color of some kind. It's whatever works. There are no rules in painting. If any artist tells you a rule, they're not understanding what history is. History in painting has been nothing but breaking the rules. Okay? Any other questions? Good.